Knowledge is power.
Reality is.
Welcome to the Junkyard Love Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with Zach Beach. Welcome, Zach.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on, man. You messaged me, you reached out to me on Instagram, and I was like, actually, yeah, let's squeeze you in. I know I had mentioned I have my backlog of pod match people, but I immediately was like, cool, this is going to be a great conversation, right up my alley. It seems like you are interested in a lot of the things that I'm interested in. You excel in all these different areas. So let's kind of give people who have never heard of you, they don't know anything about you. What do you do?
What do I do? I just want to thank you again for having me, and I appreciate your listeners listening to me because I am committed to one thing, and that is love. And I want everyone at the end of the show to know that they deserve all the love that their heart can have and handle, and that you are loved and you belong and you're beautiful and perfect just the way that you are. And there's nothing you need to do, change, or improve about yourself to be worthy of love. And even at the end of the day, when we make mistakes or things don't go the way that we want, you are still worthy and belonging, worthy of love and belonging. So many years ago, I decided to devote myself to love. And I do think of my work in the world as being on the level of the body, the heart, and the mind. So on the level of the body, my work involves yoga, getting people in touch with their own bodies, partner yoga and Thai massage, getting bodies to connect with other bodies. On the level of the heart, I love poetry, the language of the heart, and the language of love. And on the level of the mind, I lecture, write, and workshops and do coaching as well. Love coaching, helping people strengthen their own loving relationships. And that to me is the power of intention. Is it's open-ended, and there's a million ways to live from whatever intention you set for your own life, whether it's peace or compassion or love. And it's taken me to really wonderful places in the world. And I also encourage your listeners to live from their own intention, to think about what really matters to them most in life, to think about why they are here on this planet, and to make sure they're living in line with those inner values.
Well, so obviously this is a very natural spot for you to fill. It seems like it goes hand in hand with your personality and what you're all about. How did you find this intention? You know, for someone who's not really thought consciously, what do you mean intention? You know, you just pick something and you aim at it, and that's what you do. Like, how did you stumble upon this for yourself?
That would be lovely if it was easy.
Right.
I do kind of think of my path as that quote that you might know, that a fool who persists in his folly eventually becomes wise. And I'm still not even to the wise part yet. I'm kind of halfway in between. But I would say my path originally did not begin with love. It began with a search for truth, right? A search for, is there any kind of underlying reality to that which we perceive? And really thinking about, why are we here? Why are humans here? What does it mean to be a good person? Those really fundamental questions that we all ask ourselves. And it's crazy to me because no matter where I went in the world, whether it was a lecture hall at some university or a church or a temple or a synagogue, I heard the same message again and again wherever I went on this search for truth, that no matter the question, the answer is love. And when I do talk about love, some people are like, oh my God, this hippie like just tells me to love everyone. And I like to remind everyone that this is grounded in science, neuroscience, social psychology. The idea that we all need love did not originate with the Beatles. It originated with an understanding of how human beings develop. We come into this world extraordinarily dependent on others to take care of ourselves, to give us the food, shelter, and care that we need to survive. And that need for connection and belonging continues for the rest of our life, right? And I love all the research that's coming out about how important social connection is for our own mental health and well-being. And some of the research, for example, says that poor social connection is just as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, or being overly obese in terms of health and longevity. So it didn't originate with some pie in the sky hippie ideal, but it's really grounded in how we as human beings are built, how our mind is wired to connect with others. And when you were like, oh, what does it mean to live with intention? Do you just choose it and then you're done with it? That would, again, be lovely, but it's iterative, right? So living with intention is a matter of one, reflecting, like what really matters most to you in this life, and then trying your best to live from that intention, right? So you might wake up in the morning and you say, I'm going to love myself today. And then you go to the mirror and you see a big zit on your forehead and you're like, you are so ugly. And you're like, dang it.
I lost already.
I know exactly. Like I was so close. Um, but that's why it's a practice, right? It is an iterative matter of continually coming back to our intention, whether it's for peace or love or compassion or understanding or forgiveness. And along with that practice, you're constantly making adjustments to your path, constantly figuring out what really works and what doesn't, right? And so sometimes, like, we think that we're on the right path. We climb. One metaphor is we reach a wall, we get to the top of the ladder, we look over the wall, we're like, wait a second, this was the wrong wall.
Hmm.
And then we have to go an entirely different path. So, just the same for me, I thought I was on a path for truth, and then truth led me to love. And now I'm on a path of love. So, who knows what this one might take me.
Wow, beautiful. Okay, so when you first began this journey, I'll just say for me, when I kind of started turning my intention inwardly, kind of asking myself these similar things that you were saying, what does it mean to what is my intention? What is my focus? Like, what am I? What should I be
Mm-hmm.
doing? These
Mm-hmm.
sort of things that kind of make you question yourself. Like, what am I? What's a human? And why does love feel good? And whatnot. Did you have I don't know, did you have any sort of like breaking moment or any sort of like what you would consider a spiritual awakening of any sorts? I don't know if you use these terminologies, but some people talk about stepping onto the path of enlightenment, that sort of thing. I don't know if you stumbled in that direction. Like, what kind of sparked you to do this sort of thing?
Mm. Well, I do think of my path as almost a continuous process of awakening. Or to put it a different way, I do think of the life path as a series of exercises in awakening or
Mm,
spiritual awakening that our task as human beings, the reason we were reincarnated in this form, that's just one way of putting it, is simply to awaken. And that everything we experience in this life is all grist for the mill. It's all signposts and exercises that we can use to facilitate our own awakening. And I wouldn't say at any point there was like this sudden moment. It has been this continuous process and this continuous deepening. And it's interesting, kind of the way you formulated your question, because it's like, oh, I've been trying to kind of figure this out, or have you been trying to figure this out? Because something that you discover on the path is thinking will not get you there. Is the mind is limited in its abilities and its conceptualizations. And to me, spirituality is almost anything that goes beyond the mind, right? This is what Eckhart Tolle says. Spirituality is anything that goes beyond the continuous movement of thinking, right? Or Mark Epstein says that spirituality is anything that transcends our personality, right? Anything that goes beyond this sense of ego, this sense of a limited self caught up in this body and stuck in an alien universe, right? So you can't think yourself there. Although the path of mental discipline and mastery is an important one, but it is a matter of discovering other dimensions to our being, other dimensions to being human. And one important dimension, of course, is the heart space, which is why I was never a big fan of the term mindfulness, because
mhm.
when we bring our full body, our full present moment awareness, there's no mind left. So I often refer to it as either A, heartfulness, because you're bringing your full heart, or B, tuning into something we already talked about. I think of mindfulness as being remindfulness, where you continually remind yourself of your intention, of why you are here. But I often also think of mindfulness as simply loving connected, presence at the same time. And again, this is this practice that we continue to do. And in yoga, we do have this kind of basic idea that nirvana and samsara are the same, or the end and the means are the same. And that if you think that you're getting somewhere or that you're trying to attain something, you've already made a mistake. Basically, like if you're meditating to attain enlightenment, like you're not meditating because you've already separated yourself from some future oriented goal. And we can come to kind of a understanding that if we are looking for like an unconditioned aspect of our experience, then it's not going to be found anywhere than right here, right now, right? Not anywhere outside of yourself, not anywhere somewhere in the future that you are trying to go towards. Because if you can gain it, guess what? You can lose it. And therefore, it's just back to the world of conditions.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it is interesting. I feel like my perception, I've always been pretty fascinated with time. It's always just been the concept has always just caught my attention. My tattoo sleeve actually on my left side is a representation of time as the four seasons. But it's interesting because I feel like when I first got into, I never really understood my obsession with time. I knew that I liked it and I knew that it was fascinating. I knew it was really cool to think about and talk about with people. I have friends who study physics, and it's really cool to talk about time with them. But the farther I kind of, again, not that we will arrive, but I guess the more I get in tune with my spiritual self, the more time, my perception of time is different. Of like this, not sitting in meditation, not thinking I'm going to arrive, or like, okay, if I do the right things, then I'm gonna like it's gonna turn on or whatever. But it's more of just sitting with, of course it is exactly how it is right now. You just become acceptance of how it is right now in order for it to kind of propagate the future that you maybe believe in. So okay, so as far as your world in meditation and yoga, when it, let's see, what question do I want to ask?
I could touch on a few things that you just said.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll ramble on into nothingness for a while. So thank you, Jack.
Well, I love because you were like, I often think about time, right?
Yeah.
And that is part of the fundamental inquiry that we find on the spiritual path, which is the human path, which is the same path that we're all walking, just the series of exercises and awakening. And it does tap into like those fundamental questions, like why are we here? What is life? Why is there something rather than nothing? And it is a matter of penetrating whether what we experience is true versus just like an artificial reality created by the mind, right? So then we get into, okay, what is space? What is matter? What is existence? What is consciousness? And what is time is, of course, wrapped into all of that. And part of our path of Viveka, or wise discrimination, is differentiating between what is part of our real experience and is there any underlying truth to that. And the basic idea is that once we are able to discover that truth, then we do attain a certain level of awakening or insight. So you probably know Vipassana just simply means insight, meaning that if you have insight into the true nature of reality, then you'll awaken. And you absolutely tap into this idea that we don't find it out there, but we find it in here. So there's this quote by Paramahansa Yogananda that I love, and he says that it is not the physicist, but it is the self-realized master that understands the true nature of reality. And we discover as soon as we look within that we're just a reflection of the cosmos, that this microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. And we look within to discover if there is any underlying truth. And of course, as soon as we look in the mind and observe the mind, we realize just the idea of time is a total illusion created by the mind, right? The only thing that ever exists is this present unfolding now. It's the mind that creates a future that doesn't exist, and it creates a past that's already gone. And then you're like, okay, well, if time is an illusion created by the mind, if my body sense mind complex is an illusion created by the mind, what is real? What is true? And that's the path.
Mm. Can we expand a little bit on, because I like explaining this. I've spoken with people and spoken with friends, kind of about. I've used the word, anxiety and depression. So often anxiety is you're thinking you're right here, right now, but you're thinking towards into the future, what might happen, or you're depressed. Often we're looking at the past. We're upset about something that might have happened. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by all we have is right now. How is, when we're thinking about the future, how is that not right now?
Yeah, I've also heard that idea. If you're I wonder if it was Shunryu Suzuki or one of those Roshi masters, but this basic idea that if you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're depressed, you're living in the past. And I don't know how many like therapists in psychology would agree with such like a blatant like reductionist statement, because there might be some other factors involved, but it is really important to understand how the mind works in order to become free of it, in order for us not to be controlled by the mind, in order for us to realize that what we might be experiencing might be very real, as we say, but it's not true, right? And one of the things the mind does is it's dual in its understanding. It splits the world in its understanding. And one of the things it does is, yes, create a future, create a past, and create any sort of abstract concept that we then get tapped into and caught up in and thinking that it is some version of the truth. And there is a matter of turning the mind into a slave, as we say, and not a master, and tapping into other ways of being in this world. Right. So there's a quote by, I want to say, Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic, and he says that our bodies know that they belong. It's our mind that makes us homeless,
Mhm.
which taps into this idea that, yeah, if you want to be in your present in this moment, it's really not hard. People think it's like, oh, some mindfulness, some mental trick. If you want to be in this moment, be in your body. Your body is breathing, beating its heart, pumping its blood, feeling, sensing in the right here and the right now. And it's the mind that is going to take you away from being in this continuous unfolding moment. Another phrase that I've heard, I'm not sure who said this, but it goes, the mind creates the abyss and it's the heart that crosses it, which again
Mm,
taps into other dimensions of our being. So first we have our body that is always in this present unfolding moment. And then of course we have this heart. So I sometimes think that, like, yes, the mind will break the world up into a million pieces, and it's the heart that will put it back together. And what I mean by, like, yeah, the mind will divide up the world. It kind of catches it in what I call a cognitive net. It separates things, categorizes things. These are this species. This is this far away. This happened in the past. This happened in the future. In order for us to understand anything, it comes from a level of duality. It comes from a level of separation, which is one way of observing and understanding the universe. But there are, of course, other ways. So, um, there's this metaphor that the Buddha uses. He says, right now, there's an arrow in your leg. And you could spend a lot of time conceptualizing, thinking about where the arrow came from and who shot it and what the trajectory and the speed of the arrow was that is now in your leg. Or you could attend to the wound and attend to the suffering.
mm,
And that's kind of my approach to certain things that the mind does, like potentially generate a sense of anxiety of the future, depression of the past, as you could think, like, okay, like, how is this working? Where did it come from? Was it my childhood trauma, et cetera, et cetera? And that can be very helpful. Or we can just attend to the fact that human beings have a penchant for making themselves miserable, for
mhm,
making ourselves suffer. Um, and the mind is the one constantly imagining and wanting things to be different than the way that they are, creating a certain level of suffering, imagining a future that could be better or a past that was better and now things are much worse. And rather than necessarily figure out those dynamics, we can simply attend to this reality that there is some suffering, and we can bring our heart to bridge the abyss, and we can come into our bodies to come back home.
mm. Yeah, it reminds me. I was thinking of I saw this meme that was like some sort of spiritual meme that was when I find the person responsible for all of my suffering, and it was them looking in the mirror, or whatever. Could we elaborate a little bit more on the difference between like heart and mind, or kind of like dropping into your heart center? I've done plenty of meditations where it's so subtle. It's so subtle, but it's so beautifully subtle. Where um, maybe you first sit down, and so your mind's a little bit racy, kind of going through. You're trying to concentrate on your breath in this meditation, for example. And then I've had the person guiding the meditation would say, drop into your heart center. They would give you different cues or different ways of kind of like bringing your awareness from either following your breath or your thinking mind, or just one pointed on something, and dropping it into your heart. And there's this, it is very subtle, but if you can kind of drop your attention into your heart, it's very difficult to describe, but like you do become detached from your thoughts in a way, if you're able to kind of
Mhm.
like um, you know there's a I've for the definite or the example of kind of ringing a bell, and at the end you're not just trying to like, all right, where's the ringing of the bell? You listen for the end. You kind of just sit in the silence of the echo after the bell rings.
Mm, mhm.
And there's something similar to that when dropping into the heart. So does any of that spark anything for you when I say kind of dropping into the heart? Does that ring any bells for you, so to say?
Indeed, absolutely. There's so many different ways I could take this. I'll just begin with a few basic ideas because one, you mentioned it's really hard to describe the heart space. It's really hard to explain.
Mm,
And that's it, right? Because we're trying to use the mind to explain something that, of course, goes beyond the mind, right? As Alan Watts would say, just as water cannot rise above its own level, so too the mind cannot rise above the level of thinking, right? And this, again, to me, is the entire spiritual journey. Some say the spiritual journey is a journey of 18 inches, traveling from here, pointing to my head, in case people can't see, from here down to here, from the head to the heart. But I also come back to a poem by Wendell Berry, and he says actually the spiritual journey is 1 inch. It's even shorter than 18, where we finally arrive at the ground beneath our feet, where we finally arrive in the here and now. But of course, human beings we're little chatterboxes. We love to talk about things, and we can try our best to describe it. And you we're starting to use kind of a more metaphoric language, right, to describe the heart when we say like, oh, we have to go deeper into this area of our being. And this to me is the power of metaphor, the power of poetry to describe a certain way of being that does potentially go beyond the mind, that does tap us into another way of being. Because we are, as we say in Zen, just fingers pointing to the moon, using words to describe a fundamentally undescribable experience. And metaphor can be a really wonderful way to get closer to the moon because it taps more into the feeling, sensing experience of being in a body and being human. So absolutely depth is a wonderful way to describe the capacity of the heart. Spaciousness is another way to describe the capacity of the heart because we get so focused on limited thoughts of the mind, we don't realize the space that is, of course, around that thought, or we get so caught up in the contents of our awareness rather than awareness itself, right?
mm,
So there's a famous dialogue of a monk who drew a bird on the chalkboard or the whiteboard, and he said, "What is this a picture of?" And people were like, "Oh, it's a bird." And he said, "No, it's the sky with a bird passing through it." And that to me is the level of the heart is a more expansive, spacious level of awareness that is able to say hold one's thoughts or even emotions, but from a place of acceptance, right? So when we get into our true nature is not the mind, right? Have you ever like introduced yourself maybe to someone who English isn't their first language, and you say, my name is
Mm.
Jacob, or I would say, my name is Zach. No one puts their hand on their head. This is me.
I'm
This is
living
me
back here,
right
I
here.
think. Aren't I back there? I'm not a little person in my head.
Right? You say, this is me. I'm here. I am
Mm.
coming from my center. So to me, that ground of being, the sense of beingness, the sense of being here, again, comes down to our bodies, comes down to our hearts, comes down to a reality that cannot be described by the mind, but we can at least try our best to point our way there. And that sense of beingness, spaciousness, depth is close to describe this reality that is
Mm.
fundamentally indescribable.
So do you have, I mean, in your retreats and your teaching, yoga, meditation, is this often profound to people? Because for me, I didn't grow up with a spiritual background at all. It was only, a few years back where I started just going, deep on YouTube and in different apps and reading different books and stuff. And I'd have these experiences where, I can kind of feel my awareness, quote unquote, drop into the heart. And it was something I hadn't really, I don't think I've felt before. Um, what's your experience when you're teaching people? Is this ever kind of a light switch for people? Is it
Hmm.
the difference
It's
between the
such an
thinking mind and
yeah, it is such an interesting question. It's very tempting for me to be like, absolutely, everyone in my classes have a
okay.
profound and life-changing experience. I do remember one time leading a 3-week yoga teacher training, and at the end of it, there was this student who was getting her PhD at a big fancy university. And she said something along the lines of, I've learned more in this course, that was 3 weeks, right, than I have in my entire PhD program.
Oh,
And I was like, I it's so true that, in our society, we teach a lot of things. We teach chemistry, we teach history, we teach physics, but rarely do we teach what is most essential. And as you know, in that book, The Little Prince, what is most essential is, of course, invisible to the eye. But that was all just a preface to say that I have found, as a teacher or facilitator, I can't teach anybody anything, especially if they're not wanting to learn. Like, you could be like, listen to something and be like, this is a bunch of crap. Like, I
yeah.
don't believe any of this. You can
Yep.
have all sorts of resistance. You probably know the story of the professor and the team master, and he's like, teach me Zen. And the team master is pouring tea into the cup until it overflows. And the professor is like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, this is your mind. Your cup is so full. I can't put any more knowledge into it. You have to empty your cup. And so, one of the things that we do discover on the path is that we all have a source of wisdom within all of us, right? And this is very contrary to what we did for the first 18 years of our life. Where we were told that in order to learn something, we have to take external information and stuff it into our brain, right? We have to read this book, we have to go to the library, we have to listen to a professor who knows things, and then internalize that information. And that is one way of gaining certain understanding of the world. But something we discover on the spiritual path is that our inner space is just as vast as outer space, and that there is a source of wisdom inside of us that we can get in touch with. So I do think all I can do with anything that I ever teach is just point.
Mm,
Hey, look, what's inside of there?
mm,
What happens when you do this? Is there anything beyond the continuous movement of thinking? Is there any part of your experience that goes beyond the general narrative that you have been taught? But it's up to the student to do it, right? So
yeah.
sometimes the dharma, the teachings, or the path is described as a door that is being opened, but you, as the student, as the practitioner, have to walk through it.
Mm,
So you've also probably heard that basic idea that when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And I feel like people misinterpret this lesson because it almost seems like magical thinking. Like once you're ready, poof, this teacher will just appear right in front of you. But it doesn't work that way. It really works that once you become fully ready, you will discover the myriad of teachers, both living and non living, both human and non human, that are all around you at all times. You will open yourself up and you can learn just as much from a flower as you can from
Mm.
your breath, as you can from Shinryu Suzuki or Amma or somebody else, that some other guru teacher that you enjoy. Um, and it's that to me is the truth of it, is that once you're ready, then you are open to learning so much from all the teachers that are around you.
Yeah, there's just a wealth of knowledge happening. Or, maybe even knowledge isn't the right word, but a wealth of wisdom, perhaps, happening at all times if you could just tune to it in a way. There's so much to be learned. There's so many. Sometimes I like to, in a sense, compare life to a video game of, all right, what's the world, what's this level that I'm on today trying to teach me? Because if
Mm,
you're open to actually learning, like, oh, dang, this thing happened to me. Oh, I locked my keys in my car. Well, dang, it could, it switches you from that mindset of this always happens to me, or this is so hard for me to handle, into like, oh, what can I learn from this? Did you, so,
absolutely.
I really love, in the poetic world, I like to think of, I think poetry is one of the closer things to koans. It's that ushering in of epiphany. It's that
Hmm.
um, that little, the finger pointing at the moon for sure. But what's your journey with poetry yourself in your own writing? Like, how did you stumble upon this? Did you have any poems when you first started writing, you first started reading, that you're like, oh, that is that does do that, pointing to something much more profound? Or did you have any koan sort of experiences when you first started with poetry?
Mm. It's so lovely that you are bringing up a koan, because this is something that I've found also in my teaching. Because we in the West, we kind of have this basic idea that a good teacher is one who is able to sum up, summarize, and explain really challenging, difficult concepts in a really simple way that we can understand, right? But then you go to, say, like a Zen monastery, and a good teacher is one that makes things so possibly and intentionally difficult that in your struggle to wrap your head around it, you attain a new and different level of understanding.
Mm.
And so, the common trope is that you go to your Zen master and you're like, why am I here? What is the nature of existence? And he'll be like, how much does 3 pounds of grain weigh? And you're like, what? And then later you go, how much does 3 pounds of grain weigh? And he'll be like, the coral in the ocean reflects the light of the moon. So too, everything arises from the emptiness that you are. And like whatever, like if it's metaphysical, they go literal. If it's literal, they go metaphysical. And that to me is what a koan is meant to do, is it's meant to be something the mind cannot grasp. And then as you struggle to to find the solution to the unsolvable problem
Mm.
that a koan creates, is in that struggle, eventually something new gets kind of squeezed out of you. So I am a big fan of koans, and I am a big fan of poetry, which is also designed to express a new way or a different way of being and understanding in the world. And you mentioned what poets or poems have inspired me early on, and there's been so many. But one poet I particularly love is Jane Hirschfield, and in one of her books, she says that poetry is both an amplification and a clarification of the human experience.
I like that.
Right? And you will find way more about what it means to be human in a poetry book than you will in the dictionary.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like the mind again wants those literal definitions. It wants everything to be laid out nicely, organized. And but the world doesn't work that way. So Um, does that answer your
Hmm.
question?
No, yeah, it certainly does. I mean, I love you bearing with me, Zach, too, because a lot of my questions are just kind of like rambling thoughts and then I trail off into a question mark. So I appreciate you playing along. So you've already written a couple poetry books. You've already written, you have your book too, The Seven Lessons of Love, Heart Wisdom for Troubling Times. Tell me a little bit about your book and your two works of poetry. And I also understand you're working on another book too, or another poetry book too, which I want to get to. But tell me about what are kind of like the summaries of what you've written thus far.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the ones that's most prevalent, I feel, to our current conversation is my most recent book. It's gonna come out on June 1st, and I'm not sure when this podcast will be aired, but it does tap a lot into many of the things that we have been discussing. Because my most recent book is called Pebbles, which is designed to bring imagery of just like a Zen garden, has many pebbles that represent harmony and with the nature and the universe. And there's themes of Zen and interdependence and spiritual awakening and nature. And of course, what it does mean to live from the heart and to have a conceptualization of this world that goes beyond the mind. So earlier, for example, when we were talking about the past and the future and the mind, doing a really good job at making our lives insufferable because it's the mind that will want things to be different, right? I know many people love that phrase that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Mm.
And I never quite resonated with it until I came across a quote by Sadhguru, the great yogi. And he's just said that pain is physical and suffering is psychological. And which
Mm.
points to it's the mind that wants things to be different than what they are, which to me is the root of suffering. Suffering is simply anytime things are not what we wish them to be.
Mm. Non-acceptance, yeah.
Right. So one of the poems in Pebbles, I can read it to you now, says, we either miss someone or miss the missing. At home, we long for the home that was, or will be, or never was. Never content to just be, or sit with the flowers that only grow in the shadows of others.
Mm.
And, a lot of the human experience, like, is wanting things and then getting it and realizing it's not what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're like the dog chasing after the car, and then once we finally get it, we like don't know what to do with ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it's not that you want like the Ferrari or the mansion, or it's that you want the level of peace, security, and safety that you think that
Yeah.
the material object is going to
Yeah.
provide for you.
That's big. I think that's actually a huge thing that many people, I was about to say wrap your minds around it, but I don't know if that's appropriate. That is very big. We the feeling that comes with the thing or the accomplishment that we're striving towards or we think we can obtain, that's what we're actually looking for. And I think you'll agree that a lot of the spiritual path is trying to find that here and now without anything else. Without how is everything that I have now okay? How can I find peace with what I have now?
Absolutely. That's one of the basic teachings we have on the spiritual path is that nothing can bring you lasting happiness, but you have it already until you
Mm.
disturb it. That's I believe it's Swami Satchidananda who said that. And we tend to be in a state of desiring. We have this if only mind. If only such and such were to occur, then I could be happy. If only I made more money. If only my boss wasn't such a jerk. If only my partner really understood me.
Mm. Mm.
And the mind is plastic. If we are constantly desiring and wanting things to be different, that's going to turn into a state that the mind continually comes back to. So sure enough, you get the thing that you want and you're happy for a little bit, but you don't associate that happiness with the fact that just for a brief moment in time, you've stopped desiring anything
Mm.
at all. Right.
And you were present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your process with writing Pebbles? Is it do you have like a daily? I wake up and I write at this time, or do you kind of like let it influence you as it comes about? You know, maybe you catch a thought and that starts your poem. For me, a lot of times I'm like, I know I want to write today. I have some time, and you know, a lot of times I feel like as long as I'm open to it, I can get at least the first couple lines, and then it's, you know, a domino effect when I write. So
Mm.
what was your process like, and what kind of sparked you at the beginning when you were writing Pebbles?
Yeah, I love your questions, Jacob. I really appreciate you asking
Thanks.
asking about my path. Um and I'll tie it back into your asking about some of my earlier works. And my first poetry collection was called Drinking Roses on Sunday, which was my poetic way of saying that love is my religion, because roses
Mm,
to me exemplified romance and love, and
right,
Sunday is when you normally go to church.
right.
So
That's
to
a
me, it
lovely
was all
name, by the
about
way. Lovely name. I
just
really like that.
it's all just like literally just bathing and drinking up love as
Yeah.
part of your religion. And then I've always resonated with poetry, loved poetry, would read tons of poetry in my classes and lessons. So I have, like, you know, a document of just hundreds of poems that I've gathered and found over the world and in the world. And after a while, I was like, you know, I kind of want to write my own poems that I read like during poses like Shavasana and yoga class. So I started writing my own poems and sharing those in class. And then those poems became 108 Shavasana poems,
Mm,
which I've beta tested myself in meditation and yoga classes, just reading it before, during, or after Shavasana. And you know, we tend, like, with any creative field, there's always some vulnerability of putting your work out there and then having it be judged by others. You know, you spend
of
like
course.
5 years making a movie, and then some reviewers like, this is a steaming pile of garbage, and you pretend
Oh,
like it doesn't affect you, but it kind of does.
yeah. That's
But
heavy.
I bring this up because there was one Amazon reviewer who, with 108 Shavasana poems, was like, these poems are too long. And I was like, all right, whoever you are, this Pebbles is for you. Because
Okay. All right.
my intention with Pebbles wasn't, you know, inspired by that review, but my intention with Pebbles is just as a pebble is something beautiful and small that you can hold in your hand. The intention was beautiful, elegant, small poems that just brighten your day or just give you another way to think about your day. So I really came back to that quote. I want to say it's from The Little Prince again, that perfection is not when nothing can be added, but when nothing can be taken away. So literally the whole time I was writing, I was like, what words do not need to be in this poem? This is a big word. How can I turn it into a smaller word? How
Yeah.
can I turn 3 syllables into two? How can I shave it down to just capture the pure essence of what this poem is trying to get across? So minimalism, elegance, these were really huge intentions when writing this. There are some poems that are like 5 words, 6 words, 7 words. There's even a poem that's 2 words.
Love it. Cool.
But that's one of the beautiful things about just poetry in general, is that everything that we do when we write can become a tool. And what I mean by that is, like, with a book, you write a paragraph, and just to fit the paragraph on the page, you have to take the line and put it on the next line. Right. But with poetry, anything can be a tool, including where's the line break? Like, when are you going to hit that enter space? Right. But you can also play with punctuation. You can also play with where the word is on the page. You can also play with paragraphs, or what we call stanzas, right, in between. So in this way, like, nothing is unnecessary, right? If you see a comma or a period or a question mark or a line break, it all is meant to get some meaning across.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. The space in between is also, you know, just as important as the words.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's really cool. So as far as your journey with yoga, when you first started yoga versus where you are now as a teacher, and you've had many years under your belt, what's the difference in your understanding? You know, and I ask that because I like to, you know, if there's anybody listening who perhaps they haven't really explored the world of yoga, and maybe they just, it's like, oh well, it's just another workout. I'm either going to go to the gym and hit the weights, or I'm going to do yoga. um,
Mhm.
I like to kind of like expand on that. I guess, yeah, like what is yoga to you, and how has it changed from when you first started till now, if it has?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a really excellent question because absolutely, when I started out, I kind of treated yoga the way most people treat yoga nowadays is a hour long workout that you do, you know, two, three, four times a week. And I really got into yoga because of its physical benefits, because I had injured my back and this was my path of healing.
Nice.
And at the beginning, I do kind of think that the way, you know, many of us practice yoga is it's almost like dipping our toe into this vast and incredible ocean of understanding. And I've been really getting into just South Indian, South Asian religions, spiritualities, and philosophies. And one of the things I've discovered, you know, you don't think about this, but you take a psychology class and they almost pretend like psychology was invented 100 years ago
Hmm.
by Jung or Freud, right? And then you take a history class and like the United States is like 200, 50 years old, and you don't realize what it's like, or I haven't didn't realize what it's like to be in a country with 5,000 years of history behind it.
Yeah.
And that our understanding of the mind, of ego, of consciousness, of did not begin 100 years ago, but for 3,000 years there have been communities and spiritual communities that have tapped into the nature of the mind, consciousness, and come to incredible psychological understandings of how the mind works and how it creates suffering and how to be free of it. So it's funny because I want to say like there's this incredible infinite amount of knowledge that yoga does tap you into. You could take any small slice of yoga and spend the rest of your life studying it. Right? You could
Mm.
become a Sanskrit scholar if you want to get into that. You could become a scholar of Southeast Asian philosophies. You could also become a physical therapist or something like that, right? So, but I say all of that because that still does come from a mind and one of gathering knowledge, which is distinctly different from simply becoming wise. And I would say I've done tons of workshops, trainings. I got a master's degree in East West psychology, and I'm constantly learning. And by far, the greatest teacher I have found is literally the breath.
Haha.
Is like
Wonderful.
your own breath will teach you everything that you need to know about yourself, about life, about the nature of reality, and so much more. And if I were to sum up like the way I'm thinking about yoga now, which I think is really important, is there's this word in Sanskrit called darshan or darshana. And we in the West would translate that to mean philosophical school, which is to say yoga is one of the 10 or 11 philosophical schools of ancient India, along with, say, Buddhism and Mimamsa and Sankhya and different things like that. But when you get to this word, it literally means way of seeing or worldview. And this is something I've just been really trying to tap into is when we do look out into the world, what do we see? What do we interpret? And you can have a totally different worldview depending on what you've been taught, what you've been led to believe by the system and culture that you've brought up in. So, just one example I often use is like when you look out and you see a tree, what do you see? Right. Well, first of all, tree is a label that comes from the mind, right? But you might see an organism undergoing photosynthesis from the
Yeah.
sun. You might see a species, right? That's one darshan. That's one darshana. Another way to see it is, do you see a manifestation of the tree spirit, right? Do you see Mother Earth offering her gifts to the world, right? Do you see a home, an ecosystem for countless creatures, right? Or are you a Buddhist? Do you see emptiness? There is fundamentally no treeness to this thing, right? So that's really the thing that's been resonating with me most is thinking about like, what do you see when you look out into the world? Is it a scientific view or is it something else?
Mhm. So how do you, a lot of times I find joy in, explaining or kind of like conversing science and spirituality, because I always it's often one or the other. Like if you believe in science, then you don't believe in any of that woo woo stuff. It seems like it's like that all the time, and it's not exactly like that. So in your studies with your masters, I'm sure you probably came across things that were, I'm sure profound to you, in your understanding East and West psychology. What are some of the bigger differences that someone might be able to like, oh wow, I never thought about that before when it comes to studying East versus West
Mm.
understanding of psychology?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And you frame it really well when you talk about this artificial bifurcation that we have created between science and spirituality, which kind of happened like in the Western world for, I want to say like 14th, 15th, 16th century, when science was coming to a different understanding than the popular, Christian belief at the time, right? We were starting to discover that we're not the center of the universe. We're not even the center of our own solar system.
Oh no, it hurts to know
And,
it.
and then there was this split, right? And um, this is our we have in the West, because again, we've all been raised to believe certain things about the world, and we do have a very particular darshan, very particular worldview, very particular categorization system that we have in our minds around what science is, around what religion and spirituality is. And I'll also even throw the role of the state in, to say this is just one way of being. It's not necessarily good or bad, but there are pros and cons to each, right? Like we do have a separation between church and state, and many people think it's this really incredible thing, and there obviously are huge benefits and less tyranny from radical believers. Um, but there are totally other ways to organize one's entire society around the sacred, around the spiritual, right? So you go to something like Bali, which the island of Bali in Indonesia, which practices a very unique blend of what they call Agama Hindu Dharma, a very interesting blend of Buddhism. So you'll see, Buddha heads everywhere, and Hinduism, and you'll see Ganeshas everywhere, and then their own kind of indigenous belief systems. And like by law, like every little town has to have a temple in the middle of it, right? And what I'm getting to that is, part of our Western darshan is we do almost see religious life as what I call like an extracurricular activity.
Mm, mm. I know what you
In
mean.
that
Yeah.
we, like, for most people, like, every Sunday you go to some church for like 2 hours of your day, and that's like it. Like that
Mm.
is the extent to which you are integrating these belief systems, and then you go to work, which is very, secular to the point of being completely sanitized of any other way of being. And then you might have a scientific endeavor, which again is very separate from one's own religious or spiritual understanding of the world. And as a result, like we don't put yoga in the same category as science, right? But absolutely, in India and the East, they would say this is absolutely a mind body empirical science that has been developed over thousands, not just like 100 years of psychology, but
Right.
over thousands of years that shapes everything that we do in the world, that shapes what we do when we wake up. It shapes our darshan, how we view the world, shapes how we organize our society, organize our family structures. And so, like, just one example is, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. We have right action and we have right livelihood. right? So it's not just like you can work for the oil company over here and destroy, valuable ecosystems and cause global
Hmm.
warming, and then come over here and then meditate and call yourself a good
Yeah.
Buddhist.
As long as you go to church, it negates. You're fine. Yeah.
Right. There's right action. You infuse it into everything it is that you do. So um to me, yoga is all about that linking together. Yoga, some say the etymology of yoga is simply one of linking or being together or experiencing unity, and recognizing that artificial separation of science and spirituality, or the sacred and the secular, is again the mind creating a world of separation, and part of our path is to bring it all back together.
Yeah. Okay, I like that. Yeah. Okay, so what is I mean, I definitely want to answer the what is love question. That's always wonderful. I'm sure you have a great answer for that. So let's go there. Let's go with what is love, and then also how can we like extrapolate it out from it's such a household term, but it's something like so deep. Like it's really is such an understanding. Like everything really is all love, and so many like our entire reality is love in a sense. So let's see where you go with it, Zach. What is love?
Right. There's so many ways I could go with it, but I tend to just start with one of the most simplest and straightforward ideas, that all love is a genuine concern for another person's well-being. And this is largely informed by some Buddhist philosophy. And you might know what are known as the four Brahma Viharas, or the four divine abodes, or the four noble qualities, where if you embody these qualities, you become a noble and good person. And all of these qualities, or three of the four qualities, are what happens when our love touches another person, what happens when our genuine concern for another person's well being touches that person and how they are doing in their life. So, one of the Brahma Viharas is simply compassion, which is what happens when our love meets somebody who is suffering, somebody who is having a challenging experience in their life. Compassion is that desire for that person to be alleviated of their suffering, right? When our love touches somebody who isn't suffering, but they're doing pretty okay, it turns into loving kindness, which is one of my most favorite concepts. You've probably heard the Pali word metta, or the Sanskrit maitri. And I often like to just use the Sanskrit words because there's never a perfect translation. So we don't even have a word for metta. So we had to combine two words to combine loving and kindness.
Mm,
And then another concept that uh, is really helpful is the third Brahmavihara, which is mudita, which is sympathetic joy, which is joy in somebody else's joy, which
mm,
is to say that if you love somebody and you want them to do good or do well, not to suffer, and they're doing pretty good, then you have mudita, you have sympathetic joy. You are happy that they are happy,
mm,
right? Which runs so contrary to like the envy and the jealousy that we tend to experience when another person, like good things happen to another person that isn't happening to you. Like your coworker comes in and they're like, "Oh, I just got that promotion. I got a big raise. Weren't you also wanting that?" Right? Not a whole lot of
yeah,
mudita.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not a whole lot of mudita there. But I love all of these things. I love compassion, loving kindness, and sympathetic joy, or joy in somebody else's joy. And that concept of mudita, or sympathetic joy, is also really crucial to love, because there's a lovely researcher. I think she was at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, named Barbara Fredrickson. And she has this book called Love 2.0, and does research, again, scientific empirical research around what love is. And then she uses this basic idea of positivity resonance, and looks at how literally physiologically you resonate with somebody that you love. And when you're guess what? It's amazing. If you're happy, if you want somebody to be happy and they want you to be happy, you get happy, guess what? They get happy that you're happy. And then you're happy that they're happy that you're happy. And then you just resonate in this happiness resonance that just
Mm,
that just takes you up. It takes you up to the sky. And that's one of the reasons, just one of why love is so powerful and transformational, because it has the capacity to take us to places we never would have dreamed of.
right.
So, and this, again, when you look at relationship science, this tends to be more important and more crucial towards successful and happy relationships. In that, by and large, yes, in a relationship, you want to be there for your partner. If they're having a hard time, you want to have some compassion for them. But what they have found when they look at successful and happy couples is while being there during the hard times is important, what's just as, if not more important, is rejoicing in each other's happiness. When your partner comes home and says, "This great thing happened today," those successful, happy couples are ones that are like, "Oh my gosh, that's
Tell
so
me about it.
amazing."
Yeah. 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 That's great. Okay, so what do you in you, you're a love coach. So you teach love in a sense. So what does it look like at the beginning, when you have people come in and I mean, I think it'd be kind of strange to sit down and like, all right, teach me about love. Like, I don't know, everybody thinks they probably have their own version of love. We think we understand love. Like, is there unlearning that you feel you have to teach often in when you're in your love coaching scenarios, situations?
Mm. So I got to qualify a few things because first you're saying, do I teach? And again, you can't teach anything.
Love it. Okay, yes.
And you've also probably noticed how free and glib advice can be in this world. So, also, as coaches, we don't um, offer advice, for example, which can be cheap and doesn't, same advice doesn't work for everyone.
Gotcha.
Um, Let me just back up a little bit because I think most people are familiar with life coaching, where you kind of have somebody and you have your kind of, you go through your like 8-part pie chart together and you work on your career and you work on your family and you work on your health and your wellness. And what I have found, and I don't have too much time to explain it, is it all ends up coming back to love and connection and belonging. And if we are to get to the true root of our happiness and the cause of our suffering, it does come back to love. In that anything that brings us on the path of happiness is that brings us more on the path of love, and our suffering in life is that of a result of lack of love. So, indeed, I love coaching people into helping them resource themselves, right? Recognizing that everything that you need is already within you. And all you have to do is bring it out. All you have to do is educe it. All we have to do is recognize that you're already strong, already capable, already know what it is that you need to do in this current challenge that you are experiencing. So people do experience challenging things around love in a number of ways. We can easily divide it up between self, other, and, well, let me divide it up into self love, love between individuals, and love between groups and communities, right? So, family, for example, would be in groups. And people struggle in all those categories at different times in their lives. So there are people that struggle with self love, loving and accepting themselves. There are people that are struggling in their friendships. They want deeper, more authentic, more connecting friendships. There are people that struggle with groups like their family. Believe it or not, I know it can be hard to believe, but some people don't have the most loving, supportive relationships with their family.
Wow.
um, but also, what's really crucial too is just community. Um,
Mm,
is we have really forgotten that we've really evolved to grow up in a network of supportive people that know us and understand us. And all those things are, of course, kind of connected to each other. So everything from romantic relationships to dating to long term to sex and sexuality, there are lots of people out there who are struggling with having an experience of love in their lives, with themselves, with a romantic partner, with their community. And I help them along on that path.
That's beautiful. What a great field to be working in. That's so great that you do any of that. Everything you do is awesome, as far as I'm concerned, Zach. Um, so you have had a podcast for a while now. You're almost. I noticed you're up right around 100 episodes. So you have. I don't know if it's a new guest every single episode, but 100 episodes. You've got to have learned something through that series by now. Is there anything like a blanket statement? Like what have you learned from podcasting?
So you're a good interviewer, Jacob. You've done your research. This is awesome. I would, if I was there, I would give you a hug or pat you on the
Oh,
back or
hug
something. But
received virtually, my friend.
virtual Zoom hug.
Thanks, Zach.
It's true. I used to run this workshop series called Learn to Love, where I'd bring in a new speaker to speak in a new topic, and it was just a lovely community and a lovely community event that we would have. And COVID upended all of our lives and everything shifted online. So I was like, okay, I can shift this online. So I did start a podcast around COVID happened, and I called it the Learn to Love podcast. And I was like, we'll see how long this goes.
Yeah.
How long we're isolated from each other.
Right.
And as we have all discovered, things have gone a lot longer than any of us ever would have
2
predicted.
weeks lasted a little bit long.
Yes. But with every crisis, there is opportunity. And I have kept it going. So every week I interview a new guest. It's either a therapist or a coach or an educator or a researcher. And we have questions on love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. And I have really been enjoying the entire experience. I've been learning about and researching the nature of love for at least 10 years now. So I like to think that I know a thing or two about a thing or two. But me, myself, I've learned so much from all of my guests. It's been really incredible. And it's also been nice that we get to connect with anybody, wherever they may be in the world. We're no longer geographically limited. And we also get to reach an audience that is anywhere in the world. So, absolutely, I've learned a lot about communication, the importance of compassion. We've talked about sex, love, intimacy, monogamy, non monogamy, long term relationships, all that. And, there's all sorts of lessons that I've learned, but I do want to just go back to this basic idea because I do feel I still have to convince people that love is the reason that we are here on this planet, because there's always that resistance.
Yes, yeah, tell me.
Because I'm telling you, it's not just some far out ideal, but everyone that I've been talking to, from psychologists at Stanford University to a therapist in the deep South to recovering evangelical Christians and coaches and therapists, they all have expressed the same message, that we all need love from the cradle to the grave, so to speak. We all need to be seen, understood, recognized for who we are. And there is nothing more special or essential as love. And just to give you like one example, when I talked about love affecting our health, right? And what's interesting is the presence of love in one's life lowers the risk factor one has for all of them, all causes of death, right? Every last one, from heart disease to cancer to suicide, right?
You think that would be like on the front page of every news station, like you think, but
well, you probably saw that like there was this longitudinal study at Harvard University. I'm pretty sure it was done by George Vaillant, who also wrote this amazing book, Spiritual Evolution. And after 70 years, they also of Harvard scientific long-term longitudinal research, they also came to the same conclusion, right? And you're like, how does that work, right? What do you mean all causes, right? And it's like, what I often point out, it's very interesting what evolution has wired us to do and not to do. So, for example, I can easily take my arm up, I can move my arm down. What I cannot do is take my sadness up and take my sadness down.
Mm.
We were wired to regulate our emotions, our stress with other people around us. What does help you bring your sadness down, bring your anger down? Talking with somebody, sharing it with somebody, being vulnerable with somebody. So, obviously, love does help us regulate our own nervous system, which has a bounty of health and positive health effects. But life is hard, and none of us can do it alone. So when we look at like, well, why is love a risk factor for suicide? Well, it's like one way to say measure somebody's um, subjective experience of love and connection. You give them a survey, right? So what are you going to ask them? So one thing you might ask them is, do you have anybody in your life that you can share a secret with or emotionally confide in, right? You might also ask them, is there anybody in your life that you could borrow $500 from if you like really needed it, right? And unfortunately, with each subsequent generation, we're more lonely and isolated than ever before. So the numbers are getting worse. But even a quarter of people now have nobody in their life that they can talk to,
Ugh.
right? So what happens when you can't borrow $500 from somebody? Well, when you're behind on rent, guess what? You get kicked out. Guess what? You're homeless. Guess what?
Mhm.
You can't get mail. You can't get a job, right? It easily puts you on this downward spiral that will end up with some overall bad effects, suicide, alcoholism, different things like that. So this is real. This isn't again some pie in the sky ideal. This is real life and this basic idea that we absolutely need others um, to be happy and to survive.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. It's something. It's in so many ways it seems so obvious, but we forget. We get too caught up in the details, and we forget the importance of just love. So, one thing that did pop into my mind, something that I think is something that I still am trying to unwind in many ways in my own psychology is transactional love. Like, you do this for me, I'll do this
Mm.
for you. I like it was something that I think that I learned at a young age as like a survival technique sort of thing. And I think it took me a while to kind of unfold it and trust the people when they're like, dude, if you need anything, call me. Like, to really trust them. Like, well, what if I don't answer my phone when you call though, and I miss the phone call, and I don't know. It's does anything spark to mind from that when I say transactional love and unwinding that belief?
Yes, the fundamental inquiry around unconditional love, if it's possible, if it's worth it, can it be done? You might read something like Osho, who you probably know, and he has this dialogue and he says something along the lines of, what most people call love is not love. It's just a transaction. It's just, I will love you if you do these things for me. If you tell me I'm beautiful
Yeah.
and, and
Prove your
you
love to me.
and you meet my emotional needs and you do these things for me, then I will love you. If you cease to do these things, my love will be quite conditional.
Yeah.
If you, I'll just like uh, cheat on me. If you do some terrible transgression, my love will very quickly turn to hate. And it is kind of incredible. There's certain the relationship that people do have with their exes, right? The things that you sometimes hear people say, and I don't want to diminish like the very real emotional pain and trauma that one can experience in a romantic and loving relationship, but just merely to observe that somehow we have gone from, you're the most important person in my life, I love you with every fiber and cell in my being, to, I mean, now you're just somebody I used to know, to
Yeah.
here's my restraining order.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, um, the question, so the question kind of begins, what what are we to do about this? And is that love? Is it real love? And what does unconditional love look like? And personally, again, there's many different ways I could kind of approach it from, but one thing I often find that people forget on the path towards unconditional love is the most important person, you.
Mhm.
Is you can love everyone. Okay. This is the path. Our path is to love everyone without conditions, believe it or not. And who else? You. You are included in that everyone.
Mhm.
Because that to me, it tends to be one of the biggest obstacles. Because you do find, I say, like, oh, you should love everyone, open your heart as much as you can. And people will say, oh, so someone in an abusive partnership should just stay there because, they love their partner, or they're staying together because they love their kids. It's like, hold on, I think you forgot somebody. You also
Mhm.
need to love yourself. You also need to have a genuine concern and love for your own being. So there's absolutely more like tender versions of love. Like, had a really rough day. I'm going to have a bubble bath, take care of myself. And there are also more young, more fierce versions of love, such as, in order for me to love myself, I need to set up this boundary. I need to um, protect myself in a certain way. Right. So, no, absolutely not. Don't stay in an abusive relationship because of the love you have for your partner or your kids. Because once you have a really healthy and supportive love for oneself, which again has to be unconditional, are you going to stop loving yourself because you made a mistake? No, you have to recognize we all make mistakes. We're all human. We're all, as Ram Dass would say, walking each other home.
Mm.
We're all, our actions are all unfolding according to our own karma and conditioning. And you can, so when you do have that healthy self-love, an important part of that is appropriate boundaries, is being like, I respect myself and honor myself, and I expect the people in my life to respect me, honor me, take care of me. If you cross this boundary, part of my self-love practice will be to separate. And
Mm.
believe it or not, I know this might be tough for some folks to hear, but you can absolutely love somebody and, I'll say, push. It's kind of an active word, but I'll say, and push them out of your life,
Mm.
or make the appropriate separation that you need between you and them so that they are not causing you unnecessary suffering. And you could say, listen, I love you. You're an incredible human being. There's a fundamental goodness in all people, including in you. And no longer can you be in my life
Mm.
for these reasons. Right.
Yeah.
So opening one's heart to other people doesn't mean you're going to be some rug that gets walked over. It doesn't mean that you have to tolerate negative behavior, toxic relationships, abusive relationships. And that does start with, in my mind, a love for oneself. And part of that love recognizes that you are imperfect and still worthy of love. You make
Mm.
mistakes and still worthy of love. And we can extend that also to other people, but we can also decide what people we want in our life and what people we do not want in our life. Right.
Right.
So even Ram Dass, like Ram Dass, the late Ram Dass, you probably know Richard Alpert, who turned into
Oh yeah.
Ram Dass. Like, he
I'm
used
a
to
huge
say,
fan of
like,
Ram Dass.
on
Yeah.
his altar, he would have a picture of, Jesus and Buddha, and then Dick Cheney. Dick
Uh-huh.
Cheney.
Yeah.
And you look at, like, how can, what is stopping me from loving this person, right? And then that is part of the path, is looking at our own resistance to
Mhm.
loving another human being.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I find a lot of times in my metta or loving kindness meditations, the thing that
Mm,
really clicked for me, the thing that really worked for me, I use Sam Harris's Waking Up app is the one I like to use a lot. But
hmm
the act of visualizing someone that your Dick Cheney or whoever it is, visualizing that person, as a child, They were a child
Mm,
once, and
hmm.
they had a whole life, but before they were who they were, and they had parents, and it kind of helps. It's this little doorway in, and as a little tip and trick for anybody, if it's difficult, often with metta, it's difficult to immediately like think of yourself and bring self love to yourself. So sometimes you could use that as a little doorway. If you're imagining someone else as a child, well, can you think of times when you were a child? Like, wouldn't you wish yourself love too? And if you could visualize, yourself as a 7-year-old or something, and okay, I can feel love for them. It starts to open a little bit of that heart doorway in a sense, into yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, I sometimes repeat this quote, and I think people have heard it so much it's almost turned into a bit of a cliche, but I'll just say it that, as Rumi would put it, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to remove all the obstacles against it. And
Mm,
part of our path of moving from conditions to unconditional love is recognizing our own obstacles that we have put in the way of our love. And a huge part of that is looking at the people in our lives that we are not loving and looking deeply at those obstacles. And I absolutely resonate very much with that meditation. Where you progressively go to more challenging people, right?
mm.
Because that's that challenge is those that challenge you the most that are pointing out um, exactly where it is you need to grow the most.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, beautiful. Okay, man. Well, we're getting up here in time. This has been amazing. Like a whole episode about love. Well, I couldn't ask for anything better. It's so great.
Wow,
So
time has flown, my friend.
yeah, it definitely has. We had a great conversation, Zach. I do want to make sure everybody knows, where to find you. You have an Instagram. You're active on Instagram. You post your new podcasts on there, the Learn to Love podcast. Can they find all of your past writings on Amazon, or is
Yeah, all my books are available on Amazon for sure.
okay? And then when does Pebbles come out?
June 1st.
June
And you can
1st.
pre-order it now. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Again, I'm strange when it comes to posting episodes, so I'm not sure exactly when this is gonna post, but
Cool. Might be
hopefully
available
sooner
right
than later.
now.
Yeah, it could be. I would love to, if you're willing, Zach. I would love to. Again, if I didn't mention anything that you want to make sure everybody knows, mention that. But I would love to go out on another poem if you have another one you'd like to share.
Sure. Um, so there's three sections of Pebbles. First section is Pebbles. Second one is Leaves, which has slightly longer ones, longer poems, kind of designed to look like leaves. And the third one is Petals, designed like a beautiful blossoming flower. And I bring this up because I don't want to make it seem like love is just sunshine and rainbows, or even that I am just living in a state of blissful sunshine, rainbowy love. Um, and I have found that often on the path that a broken heart is a gateway to an open heart.
Mm,
And definitely, it seems like right now is a time frame that breaks our heart more and more. Maybe 10 years ago we would say the same thing, but there's so much going on in the world from, I don't want to politically ostracize anybody, but I'll just say from abortion rights to Ukraine to a dying world that is under threat right now. And that was another huge motivation for Pebbles, is to cultivate a love for the natural world, for
mm,
Mother Earth, Madre Tierra, Pachamama, Mother Gaia, because in our expanding our love to more and more people, we of course cannot forget the non-human, non-living, not non-living, but non-human creatures. And that is our task, to me, is to keep our heart open throughout it all,
mm,
to have the courage to face whatever it is that needs to be faced right now, the most pressing issues. Um, and who knows, maybe by the time this airs, another pressing issue will be the main
hopefully not.
event.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we can keep the camera angles not at the new thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Okay.
part of our path to me has always been to widen the circles of our compassion to more peoples and, of course, to the natural world. So this is one of the poems that's in petals. So each stanza is just one petal on a big flower. And it goes like this. They say the center of God's sphere is everywhere, and the circumference nowhere. I have found the same to be true of an open heart. It feels all things. Those choosing wallpaper and those wondering if they will make it to the end of the day. The hawk missing its babies, and each blade of grass being cut. No stacking of selfish justifications will ever take you near enough to the sky to taste its light where we live, drunk on cherry trees, dreaming of their bloom.
That's lovely, man. That's lovely. Well, man, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your poems. I'm looking forward to checking out Pebbles when it comes out. Thanks again for your time. Thanks again for sharing, and of course, answering my rambling questions. I appreciate it. Thanks for hanging with me.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I love your open-ended questions, and your thoughtfulness just really carries through in this work that you're doing. So it's been really wonderful to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, Zach. Well, thanks so much. Listeners, love yourself. Take care of yourself. Breathe through your nose. Breathe slowly. Check out a yoga class and see what you can learn from it besides just the physical things. So, yeah. All right, man. Well, we'll be in touch, Zach. I will shoot you an email when this does post. And otherwise, have a good rest of your day, buddy.
Thank you, Jacob. Namaste.
Namaste.
At what age do we learn how to have better conversations? At what age do we learn to have better conversations with ourselves?
Knowledge is power.
Reality is